Well, I have JCron with us today, who has done some incredible things by building a $2 billion enterprise. And I'm excited to see what that journey was really like to become to that unicorn status. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Mike. Looking forward to diving into it and looking forward to adding value to anybody listening.
I love it. Well, just to give the audience a sense of where we're going, can you tell us the company that you've created?
Sure. So I actually didn't create it, but I joined Kajabi in 2016. I'll give you a little bit of the background because it's kind of fun. So Kenny Reeder, who coded all of the first lines of Kajabi at night while being a commodity trader by day, I met Kenny about 6 months after the company was started. Another interesting aspect about Kajabi is, unlike many institutionally funded companies, Kajabi was bootstrapped, profitable, and a $1 million ARR company on the first day it was available publicly. Wow. And so meeting Kenny about 6 months after the founding of the company, they hired me to be a marketing consultant and basically help with product launches and different marketing campaigns. Worked with them for about 6 months. They let me go to work with a shinier consultant at the time, Frank Kern. And if you're listening, you know, I'm better looking, but you're smarter. And so they ended up working with Frank. They hired me back about, I'm going to guess 3 years later for VP of Business Development. And it was funny because I actually then quit 3 days after accepting the job because the job offer came through to be CEO of a company called Digital Marketer in Austin, Texas. So we went back to the same Starbucks. Kenny fired me. I quit. He laughed and said, well, you know, I guess we're even now because I fired you, you quit, you know, clean slate. So we both ended up continuing on. I had quite a few different great executive roles and experiences. Kajabi continued to grow. I was renting an office from them because I was traveling a whole bunch. And then in September of 2016, well, you know, probably a little bit before that, I was sitting in the office and, you know, Kenny said, what's next? And I said, I got to tell you, I don't know. I was with Success Magazine. They wanted me to relocate to Dallas to continue being the general manager of Success Academy. And Kenny joked and just said, well, you know, you've done a lot. We've done a lot. We should probably just figure out something to do together because I think we should take this thing to the moon and it's easier than moving your shit out of the office. So that was kind of how the conversation started, and joined as partner and president in September of 2016. We were roughly 25 team members, approximately 6 million in ARR at the time. And then over the course of the next 5 years, culminating when we moved out of our operating roles and into a board position in July of 21, we had grown to north of 100 million in ARR, north of 400 team members, and a $2 billion valuation led by Tiger Global, TPG, Owl Rock, Meritech, and Tidemark. So unbelievable time, probably the greatest 5-year run of my career, and feel so blessed to have been a part of it.
That is incredible. And I'm excited to dive into that whole story in depth in a little bit. But first, give us a sense for what Kajabi does.
Sure. So Kajabi, other than being a hilarious name that everybody likes to misspell, is essentially what we call a knowledge commerce platform. So if you think of what e-commerce is, typically associated with physical goods, last mile logistics, stuff delivered to your house in Amazon Prime boxes, that's going to be the e-commerce world. We are the digital commerce world. So anybody that has premium content that they market, sell, and deliver, whether it be coach, consultant, teacher, trainer, anything along those lines, our platform allows you to market, sell, and deliver it. And the way that Kajabi came to be in that regard is Kenny actually built a kid's sprinkler toy, called it a Crazy Spray. And it was this PVC pipe apparatus that kids could drive their bikes through. And, you know, his kids loved it. Every kid in the neighborhood loved it. All of a sudden, parents were asking about it. So Kenny said, you know, I'm going to build this sprinkler toy. Then he realized that, you know, boxing, shipping, manufacturing was really, really hard. So the alternative was, well, I built this with my kids. Why not come up with an, you know, kind of an ingredients list, go to Home Depot, get some instructional videos online, and you're going to buy your own materials, build it yourself. And you're basically paying for the instruction manual and the ingredients list rather than buying the finished product. Kenny very quickly found out there was no place that, even as an engineer by trade, no place online where he could upload the videos, put them behind a paywall, have a PDF protected and downloadable, and essentially sell this digital product. And that's where the initial idea of Kajabi was born.
Oh, that's really great. So walk me through. So it's basically this online platform that people can sell their knowledge, basically, right, to potential customers. There's a paywall in there so that customers can really connect with you, get that content, that premium content, and pay you for that content, right?
Definitely. That's exactly what it's built for. Kajabi's belief is that the world will be a better place if everyone knows someone that knows something and is learning from someone that they care about. I think that as we look at the role that AI is going to play in the future, I think I'm still personally betting much deeper on actual intelligence versus artificial intelligence. I think if all it took for personal transformation or professional transformation was simply more information, the information revolution would have solved that, but it didn't. It gave us disinformation, misinformation, more overwhelm and distrust than ever. So I think that people, and authenticity being a currency, are going to want to learn from actual people. They're going to want to learn from people that were where they are, got to where they want to be, and have a real story behind that. So I've never been more bullish about what we do, who we do it for. And it's really something that we serve an incredibly diverse audience set. Everything from vegan cooking to personal training to improving your tennis game to ab exercises for horses that do dressage. There's no limit to the type of things that you can learn on Kajabi.
I love one thing you mentioned there. That authenticity is a currency, right? It's so powerful. You want to give me some examples of people that have done that effectively using your platform, just being authentic? Think And really, Kajabi's whole journey is about that authenticity, that, I can learn exercise from anybody. I think we all know that, if you eat less and move more, you're going to lose weight. But what if I am a mom after 3 children that also has celiac and is trying to figure out, how am I going to cook? How am I going to meal prep in a way that I can be a mom, be active, do everything I need to do with everything that's already on my plate? That's going to take somebody that's probably been through that journey. And I'm fairly certain we can find somebody on Kajabi that is a gluten-free fitness coach who has children that can share that story with you and walk you through achieving the same change that they have. So it's something that, when you think about the authenticity piece, it's really about what has made the world go round since the beginning of time, which is just human connection. I want to learn from people. I want to connect with people. Maybe there will come a time where, after a couple of generations from now, we've grown up with artificial intelligence that I don't care who tells me about it. It can be a chatbot that, doesn't have a personality or a soul, and that's okay. But at least for the foreseeable future, I don't think human connection is going anywhere, and I don't think it's going to be easily replaced or replicated. And especially in a world right now where trust is as much of a commodity as it is, I think that desire for authenticity goes up even more. So if you're listening to this and wondering how to leverage authenticity, I would say just start sharing your story, sharing what you've been through, what you've learned, what you wish you knew when you were starting out, the type of things that can catapult somebody's career, reinvent somebody's personal life, anything you have figured out that when you share it with others, you can almost see that state change in their mind. That light bulb goes on and it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know I could do that. So that's really what Kajabi is all about, is simply sharing that information with the world. So powerful. I mean, at the heart of it, it's about relationship and connection, and that's central to human existence. And you're just tapping into that in a powerful way. Well, you've built this incredible company, right? $2 billion valuation. That's B with a, or with billion with a B. But I want to dive back into history, right? You didn't start there. Where does this journey start? And what are some of the struggles you had early on that you had to accomplish and kind of move past to get even near to where you're at today?
Well, as long as your audience won't get bored with it, I'll start at the beginning. It's normally a pretty entertaining story. So
do it.
Let's go all the way back to growing up in the Midwest, northwest suburbs of Chicago. And it was a pretty interesting experience. I would say that I was middle to maybe upper middle class, still grew up backing up to a cornfield, had a BB gun, shot pop cans, lit off fireworks by myself on the 4th of July. That was my upbringing. And it was kind of a universe where if you saw an S-Class Mercedes, it may as well have been a spaceship. There was not a lot of wealth or cars, or that whole scene just wasn't really a part of where I grew up. And so when we moved to Southern California, when I turned 14, I realized that an S-Class Mercedes was more of a Newport Beach Honda Accord. They were everywhere. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this universe? What's life going to require of me to play at that level out here? So I got really focused. I was fortunate that my parents were always big on reading. I can remember my mom buying me Think and Grow Rich when I was 13 years old. And my parents, God bless them, they bet into every entrepreneurial goofy thing I had ever had. I was very early on computers, so started a desktop publishing business, passing out flyers around the neighborhoods, like whatever I could do to make some money. And then, went to college. And here I am in college, kind of trying to figure out the whole career thing. I went to Concordia University in Irvine, which is a tiny school nobody's ever heard of. And while I was going to school there, I met my first mentor. And the way that I met Steve is I was walking out of trying to find a off-campus apartment. There's a beautiful 1997 Diablo Roadster VT, top off, like the car that I had had a poster of for my entire childhood. And I'm like, oh my gosh, clearly this guy's answered every question there is to answer about life. So I drop a note into the roof of his car that basically just said, nice car, love to know how you got it, signed my name, put my phone number. So get a call back like 3 minutes later from a guy with a British accent. He's like, hi, is Jen there? And I'm like, no, there's no one here by that name. And he's like, oh, okay, hangs up. And I'm like, oh no, that was the guy. So, he called him back. He's like, oh yeah, I'm busy. Don't have time to mentor anybody. And I called him back once a week for 8 weeks. Finally, at the 8th week, he picks up the phone. He's like, look, if I have lunch with you, will you just stop calling me? And I'm like, yes, of course, I'll stop calling you. So we have lunch, became fast friends. That was 23 years ago. And Steve and I are still friends to this day. But in that lunch, he said, Johnny, if you really want to get after it in life, first thing you got to learn is sales. So he got me my first interview at Fletcher Jones Motor Cars in Newport Beach, largest Mercedes dealer in the world. And that's where I started learning phone sales. And was very successful there, earning, 6 figures while I was in college, having an absolute blast. And then started meeting all these guys my age that were buying cars that I couldn't afford. And I was like, what do you guys all do? And they're like, oh, we're in the mortgage business. I'm like, I don't even know what a mortgage is, but I want to do that. So end up leaving Fletcher Jones, going into the mortgage business, starting as a mortgage loan originator, brokering in California. 3 years later, I'm the VP of sales with 70 loan officers, writing on our own lines in 26 states. And I thought I had it made. So went out, did all the smart stuff, 100% financed a bunch of real estate, bought a bunch of cars. And then 2007 happens, company disappears, real estate's underwater. I give everything back to the bank and file bankruptcy. So it was the fastest path to life-changing wealth that then evaporated immediately. And that was probably the biggest learning experience in my life, was going bankrupt and spending the first 6 months wanting to blame everybody else, wanting to blame the market, wanting to blame circumstances, wanting to blame everything but me. And then I'd say probably 6 months later, waking up and being like, man, I can't blame anybody else. I did all of this to myself, plain and simple. So it was one of those situations where then it kind of prompted me to reinvent myself a bit. And I started to get into that world of digital marketing. How I got into digital marketing is a hilarious story as well, but that then led to executive leadership roles in a variety of online marketing and curriculum-driven companies that ultimately led me to meet Kenny, start a Kajabi, and here we are today.
So I want to first dive into 2007.
Sure.
Here you are, you grow this great wealth, and then you lose all of it. And you mentioned it was the biggest lesson of your life. Let's understand that and unpack that a little bit more for us.
Sure. So number one thing, I think a lot of people equate wealth with intelligence, and it's just flat out not true. It may be true depending on the line of work or how you got there or any of those things. But I think that what's far more likely, especially the first time you make any money, is that you believe that because you're making money, it's because you're smart. It's not because you're in the right place at the right time. It's not because you had some serendipity or chose the right industry. It's because you're somehow more brilliant than anybody else. And so for me, that prompted me to think, well, because I'm doing well in the mortgage business, I'm also going to be really good at real estate investing. And I'm also going to be really good at, building a life and planning. And I don't need anybody else's advice because I've got it figured out. And it was one of those situations where I also thought I was doing all of the right things. I, asked my parents, and my parents are, wonderful people. They, have not ever gotten beyond like that VP level of management in the companies that they've worked at. And I went to my dad and I said, Dad, I don't know what to do. Everything's going up. Market's great. How do I plan for this? And my dad kind of told me what his dad probably would have told him, which was just live on half of what you make, save the rest. You're going to be okay. And that was partially accurate. But what that didn't have in it was real estate can go down and you can be forced to sell. It can be worth less than you paid because you put no money down. It didn't go into the fact that the mortgage market could disappear entirely. And not only could my income get cut in half, but actually go to zero. It didn't incorporate all of the things on a macro trend that ultimately came back to bite me in the ass. And that was where I began to realize if I was going to play at a different level, I really needed to start getting into different rooms, surrounding myself with different people, different life experiences, but more importantly, getting around people that had seen things, done things, tried things, benefiting from experiences that weren't my own. And it was probably one of the biggest reasons why when I found out about YPO when I was 21, and it took me from age 21 to age 32 to become CEO of a company to qualify, that was why I pursued that so strongly, was because I knew I needed a peer group. I knew I needed people around me that were going to supplement that thinking that I didn't have, that experience that my family didn't have. So I would say that was the biggest learning coming out of that, was really, if you were to look at my life and ask me the number one thing that has made the biggest difference, I would say it's the quality of conversations you're having in the inflection points that matter. And that to me has been one of the biggest blessings in these groups and in my life, is that I've had great mentorship in the inflection points that matter, because they don't all matter. And if they do all matter, they don't all matter nearly as much as some. So I think you can really look at life and say, there's really only 3 to 5 giant decisions, related to who you're going to marry, what career path you're going to choose, when you realize that you need something that has the ability to scale and grow an enterprise value outside of your direct involvement. All of these small nuanced things that in the moment might not seem significant, but looking back, you're like, wow, had I gone left instead of right, my life would look completely different.
It's so powerful. I love the line that it's the conversations that you have in the inflection points that matter. That there's so much insight and power just in that one lesson. I love that.
Well, even in my personal journey, I can tell you exactly how that unfolded. So when I was leaving Success Academy, traveling to and from Dallas, and I had the choice of, do I go look for another hired gun role, or do I find a company that I can have an opportunity to have equity in and really build something of lasting value? Had I gone to my mom and dad would have said, well, wait a second, you're going to take a 50% cut in salary so that you have equity in a company and you're going to grow it. You're insane. Get the biggest salary you can, save as much of it as possible. And that's the path to success in life. But in talking with all of my friends at YPO who had all built businesses, some of them had sold businesses, they basically said, well, 2 people in particular said, hey, could you get another salaried role if this doesn't work out? And the answer is, yeah, of course. And so then it's like, well, okay, then you really got to take this shot, because the difference in delta between the salary over the long term is not what's going to massively change your life. It's the opportunity to participate in the equity growth and the enterprise value of a company. So had I not had those conversations, I might have taken, again, a different set of advice, and my life would look completely differently. We might not even be having this podcast. So it's one of those things that conversation, although seemingly insignificant at the time, really has reframed how I view life, how I view leverage, how I view opportunity, upside, and all of these concepts are things that, I'm actually writing a book. I don't tell people I'm writing a book, because then the first question they ask is, oh, when it's coming out? When is it coming out? And I'm like, I don't know, whenever I finish it. So, but all of these elements of the learnings of growing Kajabi and all of the things that Kenny and I figured out along the way, I want to put that in a format where people can access it.
I love that. If you're willing to share, what did it feel like going from having all this wealth down to near zero and losing the real estate assets?
In a weird way, it was actually freeing. Steve Jobs has an amazing quote when he was thrown out of Apple and began again at Next Computing. And he said, the weight of failure was replaced with the lightness of beginning. And it's really a situation where I think so many people, myself included, that the first time you make any money, the biggest fear you have is, oh my gosh, what if somebody comes and takes this away? Or what if I lose it? Or what if I, don't have this success? And it becomes something that it's a justified fear in a sense, because it's sort of that unknown. It's the, well, what happens, if I don't have it? What does life look like if I don't have it? How do I handle things if I don't have it? But what you very quickly begin to realize is it simply doesn't work that way. That a hot shower still feels just as nice as it did. I still enjoy a hot dog or a cheeseburger as much as I ever have. Doesn't matter if it's, Choice or Prime or A5 Wagyu fresh off the boat, massaged for its whole life, whatever. Like, you just reorient around the fact that there is still so much joy in life that you thought would change that doesn't change at all. And so I think once you recognize that the bottom is not something to be petrified of or scared off by, it allows you to risk in very different ways, because it's sort of like, that wasn't so bad. I mean, did I love going to Costco and buying frozen El Pollo Loco chicken bowls, box of 12, and like eating half of one for lunch and half for dinner? No. Could I have eaten more food? Probably, but I wanted to save money for some cocktails. So, it's like, you realize that broke isn't that bad. And Damon John wrote a great book about it called The Power of Broke. And I think that what it really teaches you is the best you'll ever be, the most creative you'll ever be, the most innovative you'll ever be is when you have to be. That it's a whole different world when, you can just write the checks, fill the office with Herman Miller furniture and MacBook Pros. And, that's not really business. So it's one of those things that I think it's very empowering. And I think it's actually a mental shift that I do everything I can to keep as much of that shift as possible top of mind, because I just see it as being incredibly valuable. Like, it's something that without that, you run the risk of returning.
Wow. The power of being broke. That is powerful. In the,
and I know everyone listening right now that is broke, you hate hearing it, because believe me, I hated hearing it then too, but it's something that allows you to take the shots you want to take anyway, because you don't have a lot to lose. That how to get wealthy is very different than how to stay wealthy. How to get wealthy is highly concentrated, highly focused in a single vehicle that gets the absolute best of you. Staying wealthy is highly diversified, not having a single point of failure, and it's a totally different mentality. So I think that that's really where not being afraid of the bottom allows you to dive in, allows you to risk, allows you to take those chances and have that fun and excitement in building something, which is very, very different than it looks like if, you're mid-tier in your career, risk averse. It's a different mindset.
Was the fear of failing, or that process of failing, was that actually worse than the failure itself once you got into that?
Oh, absolutely. The ride down and the death by 1,000 cuts, far worse, because you're watching it all go away. You're watching the housing market drop 10%, then drop 20%. And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know that I'm going to see the light of day on those houses. And then you've got the fixed costs that you took on from the mortgages, which, by the way, don't change based on the value of the house. And then you've got the car payments, and you've got this lifestyle that you've built up in your head of like, oh, well, of course I go to Mastro's every Friday night. Now it's like, yeah, that's gone. So it's very much the downward slope is not nearly as much fun. I would say that I felt far better when it was over than I did while it was happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. So one of the things I think people might fear with failure is they might say, okay, now that I have failed, that labels me as a failure, and now it's going to be harder for me to rebuild again in the future. Do you agree, disagree? What's your perspective?
I would say that I guess linguistically it's accurate, but it's really disempowering to do that to yourself. Like, I would say failure is the label you get to put on when you've decided to not try one more time. That, if you're like, it's just not for me, I'm out. Sure, label yourself a failure or not, give yourself the intellectual flexibility of just saying that just wasn't my path, and go find whatever your path is. So I think the danger in the term failure is you got to unpack how you're defining success. And if you're defining success one-dimensionally, then yeah, a business failure is complete failure. If you're defining success multidimensionally, if you got a wife, kids, people in your life, I mean, there's there's a lot more to it. So, I mean, I don't know that I would ever be eager to label myself that, even though in the moment I might feel that way.
So it's almost more in our heads, right? How we feel about ourselves has a bigger impact on life than necessarily what people think of our past results. Would you say that's true?
Exponentially. If I look at probably what held me back the vast majority of my early management days, it would 100% be caring what everyone thought of me. I managed employees like friends, huge mistake. I, quite frankly, was worried about what strangers thought of me. And what I came to realize is they're not thinking about me at all. So it's really one of those situations where I went through a pretty amazing coaching season with a gentleman named Jim Fortin, super unbelievable entrepreneur. And to TLDR, what we did is he just said, well, JCron, you're talking about you're managing people, growing people, and you're being held back by wanting to be liked. And so he said, let me ask you a question. How will you ever know if somebody likes you? And I'm like, and you give all the standard answers of, how they respond to me and this, that, and the other thing. And he's like, well, what if they're just full of shit? Like, what if they're completely faking all of it? How will you ever know if somebody likes you? And I'm like, oh shit, I might never know if anybody likes me. And he's like, yeah, that's the point. You never will. And so then he says, so the next question is, even if you can't know if somebody likes you or not, how much does somebody have to like you for you to be able to manage them? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, well, do they need to like you like 50%, 70%, 90%? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, that's the point I'm trying to make, is you're making these managerial decisions in hopes that people will like you. You'll never know if they actually like you, and you can't even force rank how much they like you. So why don't you just do what needs to be done and, skip the like part? And it was a light bulb going on in my head, because I had always solved for other people's comfort. I had always solved for other people's standards. I was the manager that would always take things back on my plate that people weren't doing or couldn't do or shouldn't do. And it just was a situation where once I realized that, that was a big unlock for me.
That's awesome. So now you hit the bottom of the barrel, right? But now you got this sense of freedom and reinvention. What did you start thinking about? What did you start exploring at that point?
Well, for me, that was really when I dove pretty deep into the world of online marketing. It was an opportunity to totally reinvent myself. The majority of my career at that point had been sales and sales leadership. I didn't understand what marketing was. And so it set off this hilarious group of misadventures of learning the marketing world and the online marketing world, which iterates and grows faster than any other universe I've ever anticipated. So it's one of those situations where the way that it actually happened was, so in the mortgage business, there were a lot of marketers selling into the mortgage business with what Dan Kennedy kind of invented as information marketing. And yes, there's other marketers out there, but I give Dan Kennedy credit for inventing the world of information marketing. And what information marketing was at the time was, hey, you're in the mortgage business. I use this 3-step direct mail sequence, works like crazy. I will license this to you and you can use it and send it to your users or, your would-be customers. So all these marketers are selling into this universe that just had imploded, blew up in my face. And I'm looking at all these marketers and I'm like, maybe information marketing could be for me. Maybe that's the thing I should be doing. So I ended up buying Dan Kennedy's whole enchilada, which was literally every product Dan Kennedy's ever made, showed up at your house in like 5 boxes blocking your front door, because this was back when learning products were all workbooks, CDs, and DVDs back in the day, even some cassette tapes. I actually have cassette tape programs, no joke. And on these tapes, I'm listening and I hear this guy named Joe Polish, and Joe Polish says, someday they will erect a statue to my contributions for direct response marketing. And I was like, that guy sounds like a good guy to get to know. So I call up his office, say, hey, Joe, hoping you can teach me how to be an information marketer. And his office says, well, Joe's $25,000 a day for consulting. And I said, you know what? That's wonderful. I'm bankrupt. So I'll give him $500 for 5 minutes. If he doesn't want to be my friend, that's cool. So we end up becoming friends. He says, dude, just go ahead and move out to Arizona. I'll happily mentor you. So I followed him around for 3 months, living in Arizona, learning all about copywriting, direct response. At the time, Joe was working with carpet cleaners. He now runs probably one of the most exclusive think tanks in the world called Genius Network. And that was my first mentor in the world of marketing. I then did the same thing with a gentleman named Matt Basak. I moved to Atlanta, followed Matt around to all of the online marketing events for the next 6 months, learned everything about the industry, moved back to Arizona, got hired by Chet Holmes, who is building Business Breakthroughs International, the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Ultimate Sales Machine. And that then got acquired by Tony Robbins. The Tony Robbins curriculum everybody knows today as Business Mastery actually started out as the Ultimate Business Mastery Summit when he was acquiring Chet Holmes's company. So had a chance to work with Chet. Tony hired out of there to work with Mike Koenigs at Traffic Geyser in San Diego, a video syndication software back when there were 42 video sharing sites. There's now only one. And then went from Traffic Geyser to GKIC, coming full circle as their VP of Biz Dev, working with all their affiliate partners. Did some consulting, ended up at CEO of Digital Marketer in Austin, Texas. Got to spend a year with one of the premier names in online marketing training and one of the largest events in the industry, Traffic and Conversion in San Diego. And then following Digital Marketer, 2 years with a multi-level marketing company, global CEO, which was super fun. Then Success Academy, which was Success Magazine's digital education universe as their GM, then Kajabi. So it was kind of that failure, that bankruptcy, that opportunity to be like, well, okay, I've got a clean slate. I am starting with zero. What am I going to do? That led me into the world of marketing and then ultimately online marketing and then software.
Well, it's interesting because if you weren't bankrupt, you wouldn't have had the pitch of I've got $500 for 5 minutes to even get in the door to begin with. So actually the bankruptcy actually kind of helped.
It's kind of funny. Like there is a lot of serendipity when you're looking backwards. There's no doubt about it. You can begin to see how those inflection points happen. And I think it would be easy to look at it and say like, well, had you not done that, you might not be here today. And that's partially true. But I think like anything, there is a survivorship bias built into those type of decisions. So it would be easy to say, oh my gosh, JCron went bankrupt and then totally changed directions. I should do that. Maybe. But the other thing that could have happened, and depending on who I knew then, I might have actually made a different decision because I was so reeling from my bankruptcy that I was looking to grab any lifeline I could. I wasn't thinking clearly. It was just, I'm going to switch everything and go change everything, and this is what I'm going to do. However, and Naval Ravikant's the one who said it, but it really takes about 10 years to be any good at anything. So at that point, I had been in the mortgage business 4 years. I knew it inside and out. What I could have done is I could have taken a step back and asked, okay, what's going on in the mortgage business? What does this mean? And then I could have transitioned from mortgages into loan modifications, which some people did, then transitioned into debt settlement, which some people did. And it allowed them to keep all of their employees, all of their call center, everything. And then all of a sudden, guess what? The mortgage market came back, roaring back like it always does. And they were ready and they capitalized on it and they built gigantic mortgage companies. Now, would it have gone as well? Probably not. I don't anticipate, outdoing what we were able to create with Kajabi, but it's something that just because I switched doesn't mean you should switch or you should burn the boats or you should I feel like today there's so much intellectual junk food on the internet about like all in, grind, burn the boats. Like it's just really fun to say. But at the end of the day, whenever you burn the boats or whenever you switch something, you're effectively starting over. And it's why when I got into online marketing, it took me about 10 years. It took me about 10 years to understand what I was doing, who the players were, build my network and relationships. All of those things took time. And could I have achieved similar results staying in the mortgage business? Maybe, because I was already 4 years into that 10-year journey. Obviously, we won't know because, I took the road less traveled and that's what made all the difference. So I think that's Frost. But it's one of those situations where the only reason I'm extremely blessed to have had the adventure I've had, but I want to make sure I'm sharing with everybody, you don't have to do it that way. You don't have to burn the boats. You don't have to jump in that direction. There's a lot of ways you could approach this. So that's my little disclaimer.
So you've had 10 years or so in that time period to get good at marketing. That's a lot to get good at. Is there any interesting insights you've learned about marketing that are maybe different than what the rest of the world might say about marketing as a result of that experience?
Absolutely. What is new isn't true, and what is true probably isn't new. So as you look at everybody that's trying to sell you something about email marketing being dead, or direct mail being dead, or websites being dead, or whatever it is that, it's no longer Facebook, it's TikTok, it's no longer TikTok, it's Twitter, it's no longer Twitter, it's Clubhouse, it's no longer whatever the hell any of them are called. It's one of those industries that it iterates so quickly that I think it prompts people to have a tremendous amount of overwhelm. And they feel like they need to be everywhere and do everything. And it's simply not true. That Bruce Lee said, "I don't fear the man who knows 10,000 kicks. I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times." And I would say that in the world of marketing, that could not be more true. So choose something, master it, layer something else on top of it, master it. But if you try to go on 10 different arenas with 10 different plans, you're going to make $0. It's just one of those situations where you simply can't. It's kind of like taking 100% of your efforts and approaching 10 things with 10% each, and that's not enough to move the needle.
If someone's just starting out from scratch, what area of marketing would you recommend to start in?
I would go foundational, and I would learn copywriting, because copywriting is the only thing that no matter what you're doing, that will make you better. So if you're designing a website, you'll understand what it's actually supposed to do. If you're filming a video, you're going to know how to talk and create maximum persuasion. If you're writing content of any kind, you better know how to copyright. There's not an area of marketing that copywriting doesn't touch. So if you're learning marketing, that is absolutely the foundational skill. I wouldn't start anywhere else.
So then if someone's learning copywriting, how do they master that? Is there classes they should take, watch videos, or just practice?
I will tell you how I learned it, and I will tell you it's the stupidest thing you're going to laugh when I tell you. But one of the first things Joe Polish had me do in his office is Joe gave me some of Gary Halbert's best long form sales letters, and I actually rewrote them. Literally, sales letter on one side, me with a pen and pad on the other side, writing the letter with my hand that Gary had already written, and worked masterfully. And I asked Joe, I'm like, "Why are you having me do this?" He goes, "Because Gary Halbert had me do this, and this is the easiest way to learn copywriting." Everyone used to always say, "Oh, I wish I could write a sales letter like you." He's like, "You can just write the sales letter I wrote." And it's one of those things that it sounds silly, but over time, it begins to ingrain in you the process of great writing and the words used, the pacing, the cadence, all of the things that are necessary to be able to win in that medium. There's another course out there as well. Sam Parr, who is an incredible entrepreneur as well, sold the newsletter The Hustle to HubSpot, and now has Hampton, an amazing entrepreneurial mentoring group growing like crazy. But he has a copywriting course also that I would say is kind of the modern day version of handwriting Gary Halbert's letters, because what he does is over the course of email, introduces you to some of the best performing copy in the world, and then has you essentially model and write that. So again, internalizing those elements and skills so that you can deploy them in your own business.
So simple.
I know.
But I would have never thought of it.
It's so simple, and that's why nobody will do it. Nobody will do it, because they're like, "Oh no, I got important things to do." It's like, okay, well, I was writing letters, so.
That's awesome. So earlier on the conversation, you mentioned that there was a humorous story about getting into marketing. What is that story?
The humorous story about getting into marketing was calling up Joe's office and, begging for 5 minutes. And it was one of those situations where the way everything happened just was, serendipitous, but also pretty unbelievable. Like when you think about the fact that, so I call up right after that, Joe happens to be coming to Los Angeles for a dinner. We meet over dinner, have some steaks up in Los Angeles. And he's like, you seem like a sharp guy. I think I can find a project or something that we can work on together. Calls me back a couple of days later, says, "Hey, pack for a week, pick me up at LAX." And I'm like, okay. So pick him up at LAX, drive right over to Burbank, hop on a Gulfstream 550 with Bill Phillips and his whole entourage. And Bill Phillips was the gentleman who sold EAS. I believe he sold it for $300 million. It was one of the largest sports supplement companies of its day. Did the documentary Body of Work and did the competition Body for Life, which actually was a physique transformation competition that resulted in him being the largest donor to the Make-A-Wish Foundation and turned into a pretty unbelievable growth driver for his company. Well, I end up on his private plane because he's got a new book called Transformation that he's going to be talking about at Harv Eker's Seminar of the Century in Aspen. Bearing in mind, I've never been on a private plane. I've never been to Aspen. I've never been to Matsuhisa for a Bill and Hillary Clinton fundraiser and chatting with Alan Greenspan and, meeting Mark Victor Hansen and Harv Eker and Art Linkletter and, just all of these people that I'd only seen on their book covers. And it was just a surreal experience. And it all happened because I was just dumb enough to say sure, my response could have been like, oh, well, it's 25 grand. I can't afford it. Thanks. And I could have hung up the call and nothing would have happened. But being willing to just be like, well, could I do this? And that made all the difference. It created the beginning of my new career. Joe is still a friend and mentor to this day. I still go to his Genius Network and I'm a proud member of it. It's been really, really neat to see the role that relationships have played in my success over the long term. And the vast majority of that has come out of just being willing to risk, being willing to try, being willing to do things that, maybe others wouldn't have done. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it seems, every person I talk to that's had a lot of success, they kind of point back to those relationships, because without that, you can't anywhere nearly achieve the kind of goals that you've achieved.
Yeah, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I believe that's credited with being an African proverb of some kind, but in my experience, it's very, very true. An author that I actually think the world of, he's probably the author that I recommend the most of his stuff most often, is Richard Koch, one of the most unbelievably brilliant business thinkers and investors. And in his book, The 80-20 Theory, he actually has what I think is one of the most impactful strategies that anyone's ever talked about. And he calls it the power of loose ties. And he actually goes through an academic study of showing that the majority of opportunities that come your way in life don't come from people that you have deep, in-depth relationships with. It actually comes from people that you've got what he calls loose ties, your acquaintances, the people that you see at a bar at a trade show and you say hi, and those people. So he has this whole philosophy on very purposefully maintaining and growing the surface area for luck to find you through these weak ties. And for me, that has been an incredible learning. And it's why I love, doing these podcasts. You and I are getting to know each other. By the time we hang up this podcast, you're going to know far more about me than you probably wanted to. And, that way, when I say to you, and yeah, Mike, my goal is to invest in or partner with companies that, want to do what I did at Kajabi. I'm looking for companies that want to scale to exit and either need the capital or the intellectual capital to do that. You might be like, oh, dude, I know 3 guys you got to talk to. So it's one of those things that, that's how it happens. And so I think for everybody listening, you just got to be willing to put yourself out there, have those conversations, be willing to try and think about how you can deliver value for somebody else. And please, dear God, don't ask if you can pick their brain. Don't ask if they've got a 30-minute phone call slot available. Like the number one thing I have learned is how bad all of my communication was when I wasn't busy trying to get a hold of busy people. It was terrible. Like, it was literally like I would get offended that somebody didn't want to jump on a 30-minute phone call with me. And it's like, I don't even have 30-minute phone calls with my parents. So it's like, I screwed all of that up pretty handsomely.
What sorts of ways do you recommend to people now to connect with people if they're not going to just offer 30-minute phone calls?
Be brief, be brilliant, be gone. That would definitely be the formula. So, skip the hope my email finds you well, skip the giant preamble that nobody gives a shit about. You really want to recognize that you've got 2 to 3 sentences that are going to get read. they better have the weight that you're hoping for. So it is what's in it for the person reading, because if it doesn't pass that test, they're not going to read it. The next one is how frictionless or effortless can you make whatever you are asking of them? And that's really it. So it's deliver value, make it easy, and you're done. But most people, the email's always about them. It's about, this, hey, let's network. Do you have 30 minutes? It's like, no, I don't have 30 minutes. And I don't even know what your value prop is or why you're asking. Like, it's why most people hate LinkedIn so much, because you get nothing but, do you have 15 minutes for a meeting? Do you have 15 minutes for a meeting? It's like, no, if I had 15 minutes for a meeting, I would be taking a meeting with somebody that I needed to take a meeting with, not a stranger that I met online.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I get bombarded all the time on LinkedIn, as I'm sure you do. But yeah, the people
half the
that
time when I'm
stand
bored,
out,
I'll actually reply back and just be like, does this ever work? like, is this actually working? It's kind of fun sometimes, because some people will be like, yeah, it actually is working. I'm like, dude, good on you. I'm not going to reply, but I'm glad it's working. Other people are like, well, I mean, I'm not getting a lot of responses. Like, what do you think I'm doing wrong? It's like, well, everything to start. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive into Kajabi for the remaining part of our time. Walk me through the story of how you got involved. I know you touched on it earlier, but let's dive into that in a little more depth.
Sure. So Kenny and I had been friends now for probably about 5-ish years. And it was really a situation where we had built up a pretty amazing friendship. And over time, my skill and development became something that would be a great fit for the next season of growth and ambition at Kajabi. So it was the type of situation where, and Kenny and I joke about this often, there's kind of two types of people in our universe, which is there are marketers that build software, and there are software developers that learn how to market. And the latter is far, far better, because a software developer is going to focus on product. A marketer is going to focus on the campaign and how to sell whatever the product is. So in Kajabi's case, Kajabi was a product-led company. It had unbelievable product market fit. It was serving the needs of entrepreneurs in a really impactful way, as evidenced by the fact that, Kajabi now powers $2 billion a year of transactions for its user base. And that's $2 billion a year of unbelievable transformational courses and information that are impacting the lives of people all over the world. And having that type of product that creates that type of transformation, you don't have to market heavily. You don't have to be crazy good with your 47-point Facebook ad hack, whatever. And that's where I think Kajabi really won. And so for me, it was building a relationship over the long term that, I never knew whether or not Kenny and I would get a chance to work together again. It's not like we said, hey, let's be friends just in case we ever work together. We're still friends to this day, and we still talk daily, even though we've got our quarterly board meetings. It's something that he's pretty much my best friend. And it was a situation where when the company was sort of transitioning from what was a lifestyle business into a scale up, Kenny wanted somebody that was ready to take it to that level and be in the trenches to do the work that was needed. And so when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And I mean, in this case, it's when, luck is when hard work meets opportunity. And, that was kind of the way it unfolded for me, that I had just happened to have spent the last, 2007 to 2016. I had spent the last 9 years learning about marketing and getting to know all of the players in the industry that became joint venture partners, and being the CEO or executive of companies that were customers of Kajabi and using the platform to sell training and curriculum all over the world. So it was all of that lining up at the right time that led to, yeah, JCron, we'd really like you to join as partner and president, and, let's take this thing to the moon.
That's awesome. So you jump in as partner and president. Now you're in this company, right? Here's your chance to take someone to the moon. Where do you even start?
Well, Kenny and I actually had a great working relationship, because the way that I would say that it functioned is almost like co-CEOs, but at the end of the day, Kenny was the CEO. Like, my personality as the president of the company was very much focused in a couple of key areas, namely sales and marketing, customer experience, and the operations to support that. Kenny was in the product and engineering side of things. And Kenny and I always had the type of dynamic where we kind of were in all of each other's areas together, hence the co-CEO style. But if I'm arguing to go right and Kenny's arguing to go left, eventually someone's got to make the call. And we had the dynamic where if Kenny's like, look, man, I understand why you want to go right, we're going to go left. Well, my next response was, I love left. Let's go. It was never, let's lock, loggerheads and not make any progress. It was very much a dynamic where Kenny was never the heavy-handed, ego-driven CEO that I ever felt the need to fight with. Kenny was the guy that we did this together. And, I knew that if we went left and right was the right call, Kenny was going to very quickly decide to go right, and, we'd head right. So it was the type of dynamic that we were very fortunate in our partnership that we only had one fight, and it lasted about 45 minutes. And it took 2 laps of walking around the office, outside to solve it. And it wasn't even a big fight. It was about, should we use stock photography or should we use actual photography from our Kajabi users? And we decided to use actual photography. And it was kind of that argument of like, well, with stock photography, we can ship more marketing campaigns faster, hence what I wanted to do. But to Kenny's point, if we're using stock photography, we're losing some of the authenticity of featuring and using our Kajabi heroes. And looking back on it, I think he was pretty much right. The authenticity and featuring our heroes became a huge part of who we are and what we do. So we were very, very aligned. And I think that's one of the things that really helped with our relationship. But going back to your question about you're now in this company, where do you focus? It's pretty much the same thing as any company that you go into. You get acclimated, you learn the people, you figure out where the problems are, and then you just go about fixing it. Because ultimately, after you've been with a company about 90 days, you're far less useful. You've got about 3 months of what I like to call new guy eyes, where you're going to ask village idiot questions of why things are done the way that they're done. And after 90 days, you're not going to ask those questions because that's just the way we've always done them. So I think that you've got that early stage advantage to be able to shake things up, try new things. And that was really where I had a lot of fun. I got to really push hard into marketing, really expand what we were doing, where we were doing it, how we were doing it. That was super fun. Got to do a ton with customer experience, which was also super, super fun. While everybody else was trying to figure out how to do less for their customers, we always were trying to do more. When everybody else was, like, hey, could we just get it just to a knowledge base? We're like, well, we're going to offer email support. And then they're like, well, we offer email support. And I'm like, all right, well, we now offer email support 24/7. And they're like, okay, well, maybe we'll offer 24/7 email. I'm like, well, great. We're going to add live chat. And then, oh, well, we'll add live chat. Great. We're going to do live chat 24/7. So it was this perpetual desire to show up in bigger ways and do more for our customers when other people were trying to do less.
Did you know that you wanted to get to like $1 billion valuation from the get-go?
No, definitely not. Maybe there are people out there that know that they've got that tiger by the tail. I would say now I could probably look at a company and say, yeah, I think that's possible. That's realistic. Let's go. But then, no, I didn't have that. It was, and even the way that we still talk about Kajabi today, all Kenny and I have ever said is we want to see Kajabi actualize its potential, whatever that means. And that might mean it was an amazing $10 million company, an amazing $100 million company, who knows? But what it means is when somebody writes the book on this industry and talks about how broadband internet connectivity and the creator economy has revolutionized training and education, we want to be who that book is written about. We don't want to be a footnote in somebody else's book. So actualizing our potential is all that matters. I don't think we ever looked at it through the lens of, can we make $1 billion company? All we ever looked at was, are our Kajabi heroes winning? And if they're winning, then we're winning. Every decision we ever made as a company was put through the lens of, is this good for our Kajabi heroes? We had a whole recognition program that was designed to really give us the ability to recognize our heroes. Online entrepreneurship can be lonely. You're talking about a lot of screen time, a lot of people that are like, well, that's not real and nobody makes money online and blah, 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 blah. So we wanted to show up, send them a t-shirt and just say, hey, you're doing this. It's happening. We're behind you. Let's go. And so our Kajabi Hero program became one of the things that we're the most proud of. But that's really what drove all of our decisions is it good for our customers?
What were some of the bigger challenges you faced in scaling Kajabi?
Well, all of them. When you decide to grow that quickly, everything breaks. Everything breaks. Like you're talking about whether it's servers, whether it's email volume. I mean, you very quickly find out what's fragile and what gets broken, and then you're running around shoring it up. And then as you're shoring that up, something else is breaking. So it's almost leaning into the fact and understanding that growth is going to be messy. And there's a couple of schools of thought about this, but I would say that Kenny and I always operated with the distinct belief that growth was always going to be messy, but it was also something that could be very purposeful. So when we went into COVID, that was when all of a sudden the world decided digital was important. So you look at all the people that were teaching, training, doing what they were doing in person that now can't do it in person. Oh my gosh, what do I do? Holy cow. They all came running to Kajabi. So all of a sudden now when we were growing, nicely at, I don't know, call it 50% compound annual growth rate. Now, all of a sudden we're 120% compound annual growth rate. And that's going to tax every system, every person, everything you have. But going back to that purposeful side, you kind of have to recognize those windows. And even though it's uncomfortable and it's not easy, you got to accept that gift and you've got to leverage it, because we could have certainly said, hey, we're not going to support that growth. We're not going to do everything we can to support that growth. We would have missed that window. And I don't know that the company would be where it was today, because during that 2 to 3 year period, it was another season of hypergrowth and another season of hypergrowth that was very not expected.
Well, what's an example of something that broke when you got all that demand during COVID?
Oh man, we had so many different scenarios. Sometimes the checkout system would break. Sometimes the email queuing would break. I remember one time where we actually had, and it's embarrassing to admit this, but it's true. We actually had our checkout system get crashed by knitting ladies, believe it or not. There is a gigantic community called Knit Stars, and it's a huge community of women that love to knit. Well, Knit Stars decided to do a flash sale on their most popular stuff, super, super cheap prices. And so all of a sudden, when you've got, 10,000, 20,000 people hitting one checkout form, all of a sudden you find out that maybe your servers aren't scaling up in the background as fast as they needed to. So, the most embarrassing story of it breaking was probably knitting ladies breaking our checkout. That I don't think it gets much more embarrassing than that.
What are you most proud of during that time? What did you guys do really well?
I would say the thing I'm most proud of by far is the stories of transformation for our customers. When you look at the role that entrepreneurship plays and the change agent it can be in individuals, families, communities, it can change everything. I wholeheartedly believe that entrepreneurship is the most powerful transformational force in the world, and it may be the only thing left that has a chance of saving it. And when you look at our users, that's what I remember. I don't remember our users saying, I bought my first Ferrari. I remember users saying, we bought a dining room that sat 12 because with 5 children, we had never had a dining room table that we could have our whole family sitting at with guests. Those are the kind of things I remember. I remember somebody, that loved horse ballet and had moved to an island to be able to practice dressage and teach it digitally on Kajabi. And they did another product launch. and they made enough that they could buy a horse poop vacuum, which apparently is like $100,000 vacuum. That's like a thing. Yeah, it's actually a thing, believe me.
Interesting.
And so it's like, it's the stories, quite frankly, of people getting to live lives they love. It's not just the raw Instagram, like here I am on my private jet with all my shiny things. It's not that. It's, I get to do a business that I never thought I could do and never thought would be a business because of what this platform does. That's what I love.
So at some point you decide to step back and step out. Did you end up selling?
So the way that it happened was in July of 21, Kenny and I moved to board director positions. And the reason that that happened was twofold. So Kenny's wife had battled breast cancer 5 years prior. And then in May or June of 21, the cancer came back. And Kenny basically said, this is my moment. I got to step down and be there fully. Last time we navigated this, we were a smaller company. We didn't have a board. Kenny did what he needed to do. I picked up the slack where I could, and we managed through it. And the quote that he gave me is, he said, last time I was physically there, but I was not mentally there. I was still thinking about the company. And so he's like, for this one, I really want to make sure I'm mentally and physically there. And so he stepped down. Board came to me and said, hey, what are you thinking? I said, well, guys, I know we're heading towards an IPO. I am not wired to be a publicly traded CEO. When it's more about politics than it is about profit, I'm the wrong tool for that job. And I've quite frankly only known this company, running it as co-CEO kind of with my best friend. So I think this is a perfect opportunity that I'll go to the board with him. We're both, on our board director seats, and it opened up opportunities for some amazing people to come into and fill that gap. So our CEO became interim CEO first while we were running a process. And then he actually won the process going through it and is now our full-time CEO, Ahad Khan. He was our COO, CFO for a year and a half before stepping into that role. So had the opportunity to work with Kenny and I very, very closely. And then we've, got a new president and chief product officer, Sean Kim, who came to us as head of product from TikTok. It's very cool to see the opportunities that change, even unexpected, can create. So that's been a really big source of pride.
What was it like going to a publicly traded company? Is that a pretty big challenge?
So going to a publicly traded company, so IPOing is, the direction that after you bring on investors, there's only really two paths. You're going to continue growing the company. You might get acquired by a strategic, or you're going to IPO and be available on the public markets. And so when you become the CEO of a publicly traded company, it's completely different, because in many ways you now have two primary objectives. You have your shareholders and you have your customers. We had always been customer only, customer first. And so being the CEO of a publicly traded company, and having a young daughter and wife at home, it was like, man, that's a big job. I think that I'm ready to be in a board seat. And, also too, looking back on it, the season that I enjoy the most is probably what I experienced. Like that 5 million in revenue to 100 million in revenue. Man, I love it. I love everything that comes with it. I love the systems, the hiring, the marketing, everything that goes into that. That was just a season that lined up perfectly for me.
So looking back now, if people want to emulate what you've done, what would you say are some of the bigger tips you would give to people following your journey?
Wow. It's one thing that I actually have had a lot of conversations with my little brother. He's 10 years younger than me. And he kind of has had that, hey, I want to do what you did sort of approach to things. And I've had to be very honest with him that he could do everything exactly the same way I did it, and it might not have the exact same outcome. So what I would say is, in the book that I'm writing called $1 Billion Bullseye, How to Grow as Big as You Want, as Fast as You Want, and Exit if you want on your terms, I'm trying to provide more of the principled view of how I view business that is designed to shift the odds in your favor. I don't know that I could tell anybody how to do exactly what I did, but I know how I can give everybody far better odds that their journey will look like mine. And so the way to do that is looking at it through the lens of a dartboard. The way to win at darts is not actually to be good at darts, but it's to have a bullseye that's bigger than everybody else's to throw darts at. And so the way that the book works is if you start dead center, you're going to have purpose, profit, and product. If you don't have the three of those rings nailed, you basically don't have a business. And then as you move outside of those rings, you're going to look at prestige, promotion, persuasion, and people, which is going to be your customer experience, your marketing, your sales process, and then the people you hire to run those systems. And those are going to be the amplifiers of those foundational three principles that we started with. So the book's really designed that if I'm looking at a business, this is the process by which I'm going to evaluate how we're doing in the areas that we're working in, any areas that we need to be improving. All of those things are going to be part and parcel of that process.
That's great. Is there anything that you want to share with our audience? Anything you want to pitch or provide to them?
Well, I would probably say if you're listening to this, you're already the type of person that's committed to living a limitless life. You know, you're listening to something educational when you don't have to be, when you're not being paid to, and you're doing it simply for one reason, to just have more, do more, be more, any of those things. And I would just tell you to continue down that path. We live in a world today where there have never been fewer barriers to entry, never been more powerful tools, never been more paths and processes that can lead to unbelievably tremendous outcomes. We truly live in a world today that anybody that tells me that they don't have any opportunity or they are required to live a life or work a job that they don't love, the only thing you're lacking is either creativity or grit. Those are the only two things, because if you have creativity and you have grit, everything is out there and available.
Well, I love that. JCron, you've been amazing sharing your story today. I so appreciate it. So thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks, Mike. My absolute pleasure. Great to be here. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed.